Good evening. My name is Faisal Khatib, and I have with me Michael Yip. We are with betterinformed.org, where we're looking to build the future, save the community, and help the neighbors, a nonprofit organization that provides education and information to help better our communities and provide housing information and education. We are located at 218 North Jefferson, Suite 103, Chicago, Illinois. You can reach us at 312-533-2688, or you can email us at neighbors@betterinformed.org. So we're here today with Michael Yip, and this is a live broadcast, so you can call anytime with any one of your questions. You can see the number at the bottom of your screen. It's 312-738-1060. So Mike, welcome to our show tonight.
Great.
So, what are we going to talk about tonight?
I think the topic tonight would be best suited for building code violations, Faisal.
Building code violations. So, what exactly are building code violations, Mike?
So building code violations are when the city of Chicago, and in this instance, obviously, finds something wrong with regard to a municipal ordinance, the city of Chicago ordinance, and they find that you, as a property owner or a landlord, have violated that.
So, that type of building violation would be something as minor as not cutting the grass and the grass getting too long?
That's right, and it could go to as minute, like you said, to overflowing garbage, but it could be as dangerous as an unstable or unsound porch in the back.
Okay, so now I remember how important that is, because I think several years ago there was a problem where a porch collapsed and a bunch of people died because they were partying on the porch, and the porch didn't have the proper structure and wasn't set up properly. So there are some kind of little things that are kind of minute, but there are some huge and pretty dangerous and life-threatening issues that could be taking place that requires attention by the city.
That's right.
Very cool. So what different kinds of building are they classified all as one big thing, or are they different locations? What exactly, how does this work?
So it's easy to classify them simply as fines versus actually full court cases. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more. With fines, it's more of an administrative judgment. That means it's typically held at 400 West Superior. You're in front of an administrative law judge. They find that you aren't in compliance with the municipal ordinance, and if you don't comply, they will fine you, and that's how it goes with those ones.
So essentially the major location for the administrative fines is 400 West Superior, but there are other locations. I think there's one at 95th Street. But really the main location for the administrative hearings is at 400 West Superior. And they handle things regarding building violations or building issues that are minor. So they require some work, but they're not rising to the level that requires a more severe process. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And I think what you're touching on now is like when we have an escalated issue. This is when either there's been multiple issues of non-compliance, or even worse, there's an issue that is with regard to a very dangerous and hazardous condition. And those are what I'm talking about, what we discussed earlier. Unsafe porches, heating issues, water issues, things of that nature.
Structural building issues, roof issues, stairways, or having where you've got a large number of violations beyond the few little ones.
That's a good way to put it, Faisal.
So you have a whole bunch of things that come together, and then what they'll do is they'll add the little ones, but you'll have these. So those, I think you and I have tagged those as M1 cases.
Yeah.
So by an M1 case, that means where the case number that you'll find that references the property has an M1 in the middle. That M is municipal, which means it's a municipal matter, and it's in the municipal district 1, which is the first municipal district, which is down at the Daily Center. And so this has to do with the City of Chicago violations, but there are violations that could be at the surrounding courthouses, and those are with non-City of Chicago. So Rolling Meadows, Schaumburg, Orland Park, Bridgeview. Those are areas that have that are their own municipal codes, and they might have their own municipal violations that'll be brought in those municipal district courts in those areas, such as the Rolling Meadows Courthouse, the Markham Courthouse. Those are just outside of the City of Chicago, but still within the Cook County, correct?
That's right.
So we're going to talk today about mostly the city of Chicago issues, which is what you'd find at 400 West Superior, which are the administrative hearings, and the municipal cases, which are found at the Daily Center downtown at 50 West Washington. Right?
Right, that's right, Faisal.
So dangerous and hazardous conditions is when it becomes... Tell me a little bit more about that. I know you talked about porches, you talked about structural. What are some of the things that you've seen in the dangerous and hazardous conditions that a landlord or a property owner should be aware of?
In my limited law experience so far, I've seen primarily heat, structural, basically what it does, porches, and roofing issues. The city of Chicago, where they have inspectors that go out into different properties and they basically inspect the property, and then they determine that you as a landlord or a property owner have not been in compliance because it has created a dangerous and hazardous condition to the community at large.
So I'm guessing there's probably different types of inspectors. It's like a whole thing. You've got building inspectors that have to do with new construction or construction process that are specific to trades. Like if you get install a new bathroom or do new plumbing, you have a plumbing inspector. But for the court inspectors, those are a little bit different, right? They were court-specific inspectors that really have nothing to do with the specific trades, right?
That's right.
So then those inspectors are usually going out there just looking at properties and seeing what issues might pop up, and then they bring them to
the city of Chicago attorneys, who basically draft the complaints and notify you with that complaint of where the violations have occurred and how you best need to address them.
So is there? How do I handle it when? What does someone need to do when they get a violation? I guess is the big question that I would have, right?
Mm-hmm. So it's important to determine between an individual landowner versus a corporation landowner, Faisal.
Okay.
With an individual landowner, you can usually appear as yourself, go pro se, and talk to the city attorneys and figure out how to best fix the situation to avoid fines if you're in the administrative court, or work it out with the city attorneys at Daily Center.
So no problem. So the complaint that I've seen M1 complaints, they still charge fines there, and I know you've kind of separated it out. Fines are still available or can be levied on the M1 cases, but from our experience, we don't see them hitting. They'll say $500 a day per violation, but in my personal experience, I've seen that usually that's just it's a leverage point in order to force and enforce the code itself to get the property owner to fix the property. But I found that usually the judges and the courts and even the city tends to rather get the owner to fix the property as opposed to actually fining them $500 a day for a year, for example. And the reason being is it's a policy piece, because if they fine an owner $100,000 and the owner pays the $100,000, the owner no longer has any money or may not have enough money to go and pay for the work to be fixed. So what ends up happening is the city benefited maybe financially, but from a public policy perspective, the public welfare and the safety of the community has now been jeopardized because the money that was supposed to be used for construction went to go pay the city fine.
It's really well
Does
said.
that make sense?
That's really well said.
Thank you. Thanks for the compliment. So what we're looking at, when you've got dangerous and hazardous conditions, the city's major emphasis is on rectifying the problem, correct?
That's right.
And when you're on the administrative side, they want you to fix the problem, but sometimes it feels like that their big angle is just to make as much money as possible. I've actually heard people joke that is the city's cash register, or just cha-ching as they're charging fine after fine. So you talked about the fact that you've got a pro se litigant who can go represent themselves if the property is owned in their individual name.
Right.
Then you said on the other hand you have corporations, and I'm presuming you're including corporations, LLCs, LTDs, corporations incorporated, as well as trusts or any other form of what I would call, or what would legally be termed as a fictitious entity. It's not a living, breathing human being. It's some sort of legal entity created for protection of property or to separate it out or liability purposes or ownership, correct?
That's right.
So why is there a separation there? In one instance, a property owner can show up and represent themselves, but are you saying that in those fictitious legal entities, they can't?
That's right, Faisal. So a few years ago, there was an Illinois Supreme Court case that deemed that corporations, as you talked about, the massive umbrella of them, limited partnerships, LTDs, LLCs, corporations of all nature, needed legal representation. Trusts, thank you. All needed legal representation in order for their legal rights to be represented in a court of law.
So, essentially, so then they have to have a lawyer.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so a lawyer must be present in order to represent. They can't represent because they don't have a license to represent anyone else other than themselves.
That's correct.
So you don't need a law license to represent yourself pro se, which is on your own. But if you're going to step in on behalf of something else or someone else, you must be a licensed attorney.
That's right.
So corporations, LLCs need. So that's a very good distinction. So so even on a pro se side, would you recommend someone showing up with an attorney, or what's the?
I would definitely recommend someone in an individual capacity show up with an attorney. They can help basically define and strategize for you to help avoid fines and further fines, and help you discuss how to best get in compliance to avoid any liability from the city.
Gotcha. And so we talked about D&H. We talked about LLCs having an attorney. And then we talked about the administrative process versus the circuit court process. So if we talk about briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the administrative process, right? So you have on the M1 process, which is the circuit court process, the city is looking for compliance, correct?
That's right.
So how does that work? So you show up to court, and they're there, and essentially what the city's looking for is compliance. So they're going to give you time. Usually they're going to give the owner or their attorney time to actually get into compliance, right? And what exactly does that mean?
So when the city files a complaint against a landowner or a corporation that has a portion of land that seems to be in violation, the violations are enumerated in the complaint, and the city usually typically gives you time in order to, like you said, rectify those violations. When they give you time, they expect that by the next time you show up in court, that you have not only complied with your fixes to the property, but also set up an appointment with a city inspector that we talked about earlier to go out there and verify that the work has been done not only correctly but also up to code.
So, but sometimes it takes longer. So what if I need more time? How do I? So if I need more time, then one of the things that I could do is I could go in and ask for more time. But ideally, I know when I've represented people in this circumstance, I usually like to have some sort of excuse me. I'd like to have some sort of work that's been completed, right?
Right.
So at least some sort of progress from where we started,
That's right.
not starting brand new. So do you have any other, some questions that you wanted to ask me about some stuff?
Yeah, I would also like to know, Faisal, is that what is the worst? You discussed before that the city look for compliance over fining you, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the worst case scenario for a homeowner that can't not seem to make ends meet to fix their property or bring it to compliance, whether it was granted a lot of time or a little bit of time?
So that's a very good question. Sorry, should have probably brought some water. So, if I'm mentioning the question, the question is, you have a homeowner who can't afford to fix the things that need to be fixed. Is that correct?
That's right.
And so what are the options available for that homeowner if they can't fix it? So the downside is, if you don't fix it, the situation will get worse. And the city does not just go away. So you cannot just ignore the problem and let it go on and go on and go on, because the city will then take forcible action, because the idea, even though it is your home, you have a constitutional right to your house, there is an overall public policy and safety that they want to maintain. So if they believe there's dangerous and hazardous conditions to you, the city can step in and make sure that those dangerous and hazardous conditions are abated. The other thing is, there's a concern that if you have brick falling off the face of the house, that's dangerous and hazardous to somebody who's walking down the street or walking by the house. Or if you live next to another property and you have all bad wiring or there's electrical issues and a fire starts, then that becomes a threat to the building next to you, or the building behind you, or the building across the street from you. So, or it become a threat to emergency personnel. So if you've got bad stairs, because the stairs aren't performing, and God forbid something happens to you and police need to show up, or paramedics, they themselves can fall, get hurt, or die, or something happening to them, just by simply walking into your house and going up a bad set of stairs. So there is this fine line of infringement on constitutional right for property, as well as the public policy and the home rule power that the city has to ensure that the general dangerous and hazardous conditions are abated in a particular property. Now, that was a big explanation to get to the answer to your question.
Right.
You said a homeowner doesn't have the money to fix the problem.
That's right.
So there are programs out there where you can actually borrow, where they'll lend you money or they'll provide services to have your property repaired. So for properties that are owner occupied, and usually this I've seen this a lot with senior citizens and elderly homeowners who don't have the wherewithal to spend $20,000 to repair a porch or a roof or whatever the case may be. The city does have specific programs where they'll appoint receivers. Mostly, and generally if it's a homeowner occupied, they'll appoint a what they call a public receiver. Now this is a receiver that is hired by the city, that gets compensated by the city, or at least reimbursed by the, not necessarily reimbursed, more like they use city funds in order to provide and perform the work necessary to abate the dangerous and hazardous condition. Now, they're not going to come and remodel your kitchen. Okay? Well, what they will do is they'll probably firm up the porch, or they'll replace the porch if need be, or they'll, if the property is vacant, they'll board it. It could be so bad they may have to remove you from the house because there's just no way they can fix it. And the question is, well, why would they do this? Well, what they'll usually do is they'll take out a lien against your property, and they'll attach this lien to the property that now takes priority over all the other liens. And then, if you're older, or if you sell the house, or you pass away and it goes to your heirs, at that time, that lien will be recovered by the city. And what they do is they'll sell it to a developer, or they'll try to recover it, or they'll just sit on it for a long period of time until the property is sold, and once it's sold, that lien will get paid off at sale. What this does is this helps abate properties. It protects people's houses so they don't get foreclosed on. And the city has no intent, and they have the strict policy that homeowner occupied properties will not be foreclosed on.
That was really, really detailed explanation. Thank you, Faisal.
No problem. I'm going to really quickly talk about, this is again who we are. This is Better Informed Housing Corporation. My name is Faisal Khatib, and I have with me Michael Yip, both attorneys at law, here providing services through Better Informed Housing Corporation. You can contact Better Housing at 218 North Jefferson, Suite 103, Chicago, Illinois. Phone number is 312-533-2688. And our email is neighbors, 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 at betterinformed.org. And we are live. There's about 4 or 5 minutes left in the show. You can call us at 312-738-1060. Any other questions, Mike?
Yeah, I think I'm going to shift gears quickly. That was a really detailed portion of receivers. Thank you, Faisal. But I think a lot of new homeowners, like people around my age, that are looking to make the next step from renting to buying.
Okay.
Some people have asked me, I'm looking to be a new tenant or I'm looking to be a new homeowner. How do I avoid getting trapped by a property that has past building code violations against it? And how do I look it up, or how do I prevent holding myself liable once that happens?
Carfax for buildings.
Well said.
So essentially, if I'm understanding your question, the issue is, how do you make sure that you don't go into a building that has a bunch of problems as a tenant, right? Because you don't want to have bed bugs, you don't want to have the porch collapsing, you want to make sure the property is safe, correct?
Right.
And then the other question is, if you're going to buy a house, how do you make sure that you're not buying a lemon? You're not buying a property with a ton of problems with it. Mm-hmm. So those are two very different questions, okay? So on a tenant side, you're going to get an opportunity to, if you walk through the place, take a look at the place. What I would recommend is there's a lot of online resources where you can look at the status of a property. So most likely you're going to ask for building permit status that tells you what permits have been done, building violation status where you can type in both those cases you type in the address of the property, and it pops up and tells you what the violation, the inspection, and the permit status is on the property. When the last time they got permits, what kind of permits did they got, what kind of work did they do. Is this an all-knowing process? No, because quite honestly, there's a lot of people out there who do work without getting permits. So even though the city is diligent, sometimes they can't be everywhere at all places at all times. But it's a good indicator as to what the property status is. If you're finding that they're continuously failing inspections over and over and over again, and I don't mean like they did it 10 years ago, I mean recently, I would say that's an indicator to go investigate a little bit further or ask some more questions. If it's a property that had building violations issues from 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago, then you can look at it and you can see kind of what the status is, and you can show that inspection passed or didn't pass or whatever the case may be. The second piece to that is a lot of times they may fail inspections, but there still wasn't that big of a deal. So they failed the inspection because they didn't have a sign in the front of the building. Well, they fixed it, it's done, no big deal, and the inspector didn't go back out because it was so minor in nature, did not require another inspection. Okay? So really, I wouldn't use that as a determinant as to, this is a bad building, but it at least gives you an idea about it. If you have questions, I would find an attorney who can explain to you what it was that violation was and some more detail. And obviously, you can always ask the landlord. Now, the landlord may not be happy with the fact that you're doing that type of research, and they may not rent to you because of that. So that becomes a landlord-tenant ordinance issue and a possible violation there. So you know what? We can talk about that at another show. With regards to buying a problem, it's important to look to see the same types of things. And I would recommend that if you're going to buy, your attorney who you have to represent you should know how to clear that and should know how that gets cleared and make sure that you don't end up with somebody else's problem. So that really depends on your buying attorney, and that would be another show we'll talk about as to, I think next month, as to how to clear building violations and title violations in housing and when it comes to buying properties and buying buildings. So, again, my name is Mahmoud Faisal Khatib. This is Michael Yip. We're both attorneys with betterinformedhousing.org. And you can find us at 218 North Jefferson, phone number 312-533-2688, or email us at neighbors@betterinformed.org. Our job is here to educate people on housing matters and housing issues. And we thank you again for tuning in. Have a good night.